for how we're going to get to that point. Councillor Bates has already said that he is our council champion for all things climate change, and internally within the service areas of the council, we have got service area leads, so it is an important corporate priority for us, and that plays out across the council with each service area having their own corporate lead around service areas, and we meet pretty regularly internally to move forward that agenda, and particularly in putting together the action plan and then monitoring that action plan. And one of the things that we committed to doing is recognising that the best way we can work on our climate change plan is to work very much in partnership with yourselves. And we've had that previous workshop back in, I think it was probably late spring, early summer, and this is the second one of those. It's about working with you on how we can move this agenda forward, and particularly how we can you can become aware of some of the initiatives. And the Green Homes Grant is certainly one of those, and you'll hear a bit more about that shortly after me. Next slide, please. So just to pick up some of the things we're doing around developments at the moment, many of you will be aware that the council offices in Codsall are undergoing a significant refurbishment and an extension, which is known as the Codsall Community Hub project. And within that redevelopment and refurbishment, we are installing a number of new car parking spaces, and on a number of those there will be new EV charging points. Within the hub itself, we're really proud of some of the energy saving initiatives that we've built into that, and hopefully over time, when we can start to monitor energy usage within the building, at the moment it's still undergoing some of that refurbishment, we can then report back to you on the improvements on not only, I suppose, in terms of the green energy and the carbon reductions we're making, but hopefully further reductions as a result of some of those initiatives. We are working with our partners to look at the feasibility of EV charging points across the district on our public car parks, and you'll hear a bit more about that later as well. And we are also looking at 3 new commercial developments at the moment, one of which is just completed, and within all of those, we are looking at how we put energy efficiency as part of those developments. But I think one of the things I'm also keen to do, and our commercial portfolio sits under my responsibility, is it's not just about the new build. We've got around about 150, 160 commercial units across the district, is how we can look at almost the retrofit agenda as part of our asset management planning. Next slide, please. And some of the quite practical things that we've been doing, we've been looking at developing wildflower meadows across the district. Certainly in the last 12 to 18 months, we've planted 1,500 new trees across the district. And we've been working in partnership with the Forest of Mercia on that, and I believe Dave Knowles from the Forest of Mercia is on this meeting. So if any of you want any practical advice of how they can work with you to look at tree planting in your particular areas, I'm sure I'd be delighted to hear from you and advise you. Many of you will also be aware that our local plan is due to be heading out to its next stage of consultation in the next few weeks, and certainly climate change and positive actions we can look at climate change are featuring heavily within that. One of the really practical things that we did in the last parish forum that we had, there was a real drive from yourselves and indeed ourselves to almost have a sort of central library of information around climate change that you could all access whenever you wanted. And what we've done is now set up a dedicated page on our website that has got all sorts of external information that people are doing locally, so that you can all go onto it whenever you want to and get any information that you might find useful within your local communities. And one of the things we're also trying to work on is, again, is working with our local businesses to see how we can help them, partly to help them, partly to help them help themselves around the climate change agenda, and particularly some of the sort of community initiatives that we're looking at. So that was a fairly whistle-stop tour through some of the things that we're looking at. What I've done is pulled together things from across different parts of the council. I'm happy to take any questions on those. I might not be able to answer all of them myself. I might have colleagues on the call who can chip in when I need to, but we thought it was probably made more sense for me to cover this all in one go rather than half a dozen colleagues chipping in a bullet points at a time. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks very much for that. Are there any, I can't see any hands up at the moment. Are there any questions for Grant in terms of the council's approach? Is that Alan Peace, I think. Is that, am I right?
Yep, correct. It
Okay.
is me
Okay.
in
Good,
person.
good.
Yes, Grant, going on to green energy and the like, and you said like new build commercial properties are to be energy efficient. Why is it that it cannot be made a condition of planning consent that all new builds, both commercial and residential, why cannot they have, the obvious one is solar panels installed at build stage? Because otherwise the government generally and South Staffs have not got a cat in hell's chance of achieving zero carbon by 2050. So all that I'm asking, very simple, why can't it be made a condition of planning?
I think that's a very good question, and I've alluded to the new local plan, which is on its way, and certainly there will be a lot more within that new local plan that will be driving a lot more of that agenda forward. But I think the other thing to bear in mind is the government, through their building regulations, will be driving a lot of this at a national level. So we can have our local standards, but I think fairly quickly national building standards will catch up. And I think my own personal feeling is there needs to be an element of carrot and stick here. So there will be regulations through government that will be driving this, but I think in time businesses are going to start to realise that actually that they've got to do something about this. That may take a bit longer, but certainly there are things in the pipeline, both in the new local plan in policy terms and through government and building regulations that should start to catch up around that sort of thing, and making sure that that is built in from the start rather than the more expensive retrofit options.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, come back on that one. Yes, I mean, I had solar panels installed on my house, retrofitted. Now that sort of cost me a fair bit of money, but it saves me £500 a year. It's an absolute no-brainer. Obviously, to fit a new stage as opposed to retro is a hell of a lot cheaper, you know, because all the construction infrastructure, scaffolding and the like is already in place. So
absolutely, yeah. I couldn't agree more, and I think this is partly where my comment's coming from, that I think businesses will start to realise that one of their biggest fixed cost is going to be energy costs, and there are ways of reducing that with potential bit of capital investment up front. You have that longer term revenue savings. So I think that's part of the message that we're trying to get through to, certainly on the business side, is they're swimming against the tide if they're trying not to listen to this agenda at the moment, because everything is pushing it in that direction. But you're absolutely 100% spot on. If you build it in from the start, it is a much better option than, as you say, you've had to go back and retrofit your house.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. We've got a number of other hands up now. I think the next person's hand up was Councillor Sadler. I think it's Councillor Sadler.
Thank you. Yes. What is under the solar panels is even more important. We need houses to be built at least to passive house standard, and that needs to be part of the planning as well. We should not be granting planning permission for energy wasting houses any more than we should for energy wasting commercial buildings. Thank you.
I'm not sure if that was a question or not, but yeah, in terms of a statement, I think absolutely, it goes back to the point I just made. If we build it right in the first place with all the correct energy measures and insulation, that's the best way to do it. So I think, you know, I refer to the previous comment about the local plan will be picking some of this up. I am aware of passive house, whether I don't quite think we'll be going that far. And as you're aware, Councillor said that is whilst they're fantastic types of new build housing, I think it is also possibly at one end of the spectrum in terms of energy efficiency. But I don't disagree with anything you've said there.
But one of the things we need to do is we need to convince house buyers that they need to buy energy efficient housing. At the moment, save £5, you put up with any kind of lousy energy efficiency rating. How do we go about convincing people that they need to be asking for this when they go looking for a house?
That's a very good point, Councillor Sadler, and it's something that we want to pick up as part of our initiative that we want to run in terms of a climate festival that's all about awareness raising. So hold that thought. We've got a few more. Hold that thought, and we can talk about that in the workshops. But that's a really good point that you've raised, and I'm sure we can discuss more about that then. I've got two more people, and then I think we've got we've got Eunice Lord from Kinver, and then I think we've got Councillor Ken Upton, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. So Eunice Lord from Kinver.
I think you're on mute, Eunice.
I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
There you go.
Teams, I'm not used to it. I was going to pick up on the leadership issue, because it's all right saying we'll encourage people to put insulation in, and it's all right saying we'll educate people. But if people have a clear system of saying this house will save you X amount of money on your energy bills, it's therefore worth paying 5k more for it, or whatever the heck. People are building new houses at market prices that are zero carbon. It can be done. But unless there's leadership from the council at local level, not saying, oh, it would be lovely, but actually setting out the agenda for how it can be done and saying, if you do this and give it with a certificate of how much energy it'll save, blah, blah, that it's zero carbon, which can be done, then we will look on your application much more favourably. It's got to be positive leadership rather than just education and saying, wouldn't it be nice sometime in the next 100 years?
Again, very good point. Very good point, Councillor Lord. I think you're right. And I think in terms of the way that we can do that as the planning authority, in terms of new build, is through the local plan. Is about ensuring that we have a policy that gives us those teeth, and that's exactly what we're trying to do through this new local plan. You'll be delighted to hear your thoughts when you see the local plan. We'll be coming to talk to parishes later on in the autumn about it. In fact, we've got a date already set for that. So we'll be delighted to hear what you think about that. But absolutely, very good point. Very good point raised. Councillor, I'm going to move us on just in terms of time. So Councillor Upton, I think it's Councillor Upton's got his hand up.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Probably the wrong time of part of this meeting to bring these points up, but these are general points. Can I raise a couple?
Yes. Okay. Go on.
This headlong rush to battery-powered cars. First of all, point one, there are 33 million vehicles on this road. How are we going to generate all the power needed to charge these vehicles? I've seen nothing on the programme that on the time scale that is going to allow us to do that. That's point one. Point two, again with electric vehicles. Batteries lose power or the ability to take a charge over years. It's not a straight line graph, it's exponential. So after, say, 5 or 6 years, the battery needs replacing. And the battery pack for a grade C car is £6,000. Now, who is going to buy a used electric vehicle? I just don't see it. I just don't think it's been thought through. These are general points, I agree, but they're very important. It's probably the most important part of the green energy commitment. Thank you.
Very good point, and again, something we can pick up in the workshop. So I'll be delighted to. We'll be delighted to pick that. Very good point. We've got one more hand up before we move on to Martin. Otherwise, we'll run over. And apologies, I just can't see what your name is from your email address. So right. There we go.
It's Brian Wyatt. Thank you. I'm from Acton Trust on Bednall. Just an issue on how to drive the energy efficient housing forward. Please do not wait for the building regulations to be competent. We've been waiting 40 years for competent building regs, and as Grenfell Tower proved, very, very sadly, we're not there, and I don't expect we'll be there in my lifetime. So the drive forward should be planning consent and local plan.
Thank you. I think exactly as we've said previously, that's what we're trying to do, and be delighted to hear your thoughts on the policies that we've got in our plan as when we consult on it later. But we absolutely agree. We need that to have the teeth, to have the teeth. Thanks very much, Grant, for that, and for setting that. Grant will be obviously around later on as well at the end of the session, but we'll have the have the opportunity to discuss some of those points in the workshop. Without further ado, I'm going to pass you over now to Martin from Beat the Cold. Martin.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm the business development manager, Martin Peake from Beat the Cold. We operate and deliver your energy advice and fuel poverty service, so Staffordshire Warmer Homes. So that's our background. Can I go to the next slide? Okay. Obviously, as a fuel poverty charity, I'm going to skew what I say around decarbonisation for that particular area, because our cohort of individuals, the kind of people that we help, will be low income and vulnerable. I've looked at the causes of fuel poverty. There are only three: high energy costs, basically people paying too much for their gas and electricity, an energy inefficient home, and the fact that they've started off with basically low disposable income. They have low income, full stop. So where decarbonisation comes into this is the energy inefficient homes. So your fuel poor cohort, those who are likely to fall into fuel poverty, are significantly more likely to fall into or live in homes which have an energy performance certificate rating of E, F or G, if they have one at all. They are more likely to be living in pre-1919 terraced houses. They are least likely to have insulation. They're more likely to have inefficient and old heating systems. So when it comes around decarbonisation, these are the most obvious people that need supporting to help to decarbonise, particularly around their housing stock being the most energy inefficient to start. There's barriers to it. Obvious barriers being financial. Again, some of these technologies, air source heat pumps, anywhere between maybe £10,000 and £13,000 each. Some to externally insulate your property, so an external wall insulation, anything between £10,000 and £20,000, depending on the size of the property. Payback on these is well, the external wall insulation is about 40 years. This cohort does not have that level of disposable income, and if they have, I'm sure they have more immediate priorities. So that's a challenge for, again, the kind of group of individuals that we support. The other issue that we will find is that this general cohort of fuel poor, the people that live in these, again, sorts of properties, are less than likely to be engaged with their energy market, energy supplier, decarbonisation. They have more pressing priorities, more immediate problems in their life, and this tends to come 5 or 6 down the road. So these individuals are never going to be early adopters of sort of green technology and anything to help with decarbonisation. So that's sort of I'm framing the sort of cohorts that we help with and some of the issues that we have around decarbonisation, particularly for the more vulnerable members or residents that live in the district. So if we can just hit onto the next slide, please. Okay. Again, where these issues fall, as you can, as I've just put the stats there, we can essentially all read them. It's different across the entire district. Okay, there's areas of deprivation. You'll all know which are your most deprived wards. There's a map coming up where you'll actually see them. But essentially, there are areas that require more help to decarbonise than others. The more affluent areas of South Staffs will be the able to pay market. The least affluent areas are going to need government support and funding, which is available. As I identified there, your worst, again, lower super output area, your lowest block of sort of 600 or 700 houses, 1 in 4 of these people can't afford to heat or eat. So the whole decarbonisation agenda for them will be miles down the line. I've used them statistics. They're government statistics, 2 years out of date. We've had COVID. We have seen a requirement for our service double or triple, particularly around the working poor. So we know there's issues there. And when I say fuel poor, it just basically means that these individuals are what we would all understand to be under the breadline when they paid their sort of fuel bills. So if I can have the next slide again, please. Okay, so I'm going to go through the decarbonisation schemes that are available. There are lots of acronyms that are coming from government schemes. and they change weekly. So we'll go through them, but if I speak to them in a few weeks' time, they may have changed. Essentially, all these schemes that I'm going to discuss are either competition schemes from government, where we are having to apply to the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy for money, or they're indirect taxation schemes, i.e. they're an obligation put on your energy company, who then charge us through our bills and are obligated to do energy efficiency measures. So for owner occupiers within the district, there are two main schemes which will form the backbone of what government does and what happens across your district in the coming 1, 2, 3, 4 years. The first one is going to be called the Sustainable Warmth Competition. It's exactly that. It is a competition. Local authorities will be bidding for funding against each other. There will be a finite pot of funding, and that Sustainable Warmth Competition is split into two specific parts. One is called Green Homes Grants Local Authority Delivery, a big mouthful. That is to decarbonise urban homes on the gas grid. And the other part of the Sustainable Warmth Competition is called the Home Upgrade Grant, and that is geared more towards off-gas properties, so rural properties, and the amount of funding that's available for them properties is higher than it is in the urban areas, because they've identified that if a property is off gas, the actual total cost to bring that up to an acceptable standard is much higher. Within South Staffordshire, we've had, well, there's been a number of phases of the Green Homes Grant Scheme. This was the Local Authority Delivery Green Homes Grant Scheme. This wasn't the one that fell to bits. This wasn't the government's sort of national green home scheme where individuals are asking to ask for £10,000 vouchers. This was one that was delivered by the local authority. And I think part of the reason that the voucher scheme broke down is that basically the government just pumped that much money into the supply chain that wasn't there, that basically local authority schemes sucked up what supply chain capacity was there, and there was nothing left for the individuals, and it fell on its backside. So please don't confuse the two. There's been a number of rounds of the Green Homes Grant, which is essentially, and again, is the Local Authority Delivery Green Homes Grant part of what will be the Sustainable Warmth Competition. But there's been 3 parts so far. There's been a phase 1A and 1B, which we have delivered in the county. That was delivered by the county council on behalf of the districts on a county-wide basis where the demand came. There was a second part of the scheme where then government did not ask you to competitively tender for the money, but identified how much money each district could be allocated based on the condition of your stock. So how much energy inefficient homes you got, and we have this one. And the next round, which is due to be the main round, which is part of the Sustainable Warmth Competition, will take off in January next year. And again, unconfirmed, but expecting it to be at least sort of double that amount. So you're probably looking at easily £1 million within the district. It sounds a lot of money when you start to divide it by having to spend 10, 15, 20 and £25,000 in a property to bring it up to a standard. It's only going to scratch the surface. Okay, I've touched on there on the second part, the home upgrade grants. Again, these will be incorporated into what's going to be called the Sustainable Warmth Competition. It is purely just a slightly separate competition. It's for off-gas properties with slightly more funding available. And the last part in there, but again, it's available. Now, this has been energy company obligation there, ECO. This is in iteration 4. There's been 4 iterations, ECO 1, 2, 3, 3 transition into 4. This is the government's main flagship scheme for dealing with fuel poverty and heating. These other competitions, the Green Homes Grants and Hugs, are fabric first, insulation, and then low carbon heating. Energy company obligation has been around insulation and broken boilers for a number of years now. The next iteration is going to run for 4 years. It's £1 billion scheme, but that's £1 billion scheme across England. You are supposed to target low income and vulnerable householders, and what we are seeing is they are making it harder and harder to replace broken gas boilers. They're starting to put caps on there, but there isn't at the moment a clear guide into what you would do if you weren't replacing a gas boiler in an urban property. So I would still say stuff that's coming down from central government through the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy is still a bit of a pig's ear. They have thrown a lot of money at decarbonisation and regreening the economy, and I think they are starting to get their act together. These kinds of figures will have to stay the same or increase if they're to hit their net zero targets, because even though these look like large amounts of money, they are tiny in the whole scheme of things. So if we can have the sort of next slide. Okay, so basically I've just tried to identify here over the last 12 months. So I've used our own data here. So basically where have we identified individuals that needed that support in the district? And so that heat map there will show you, and I think it will come as no great surprise that we've been asked for support and helping with decarbonisation, insulation measures and heating measures in the most deprived areas. I think that would be partly down, I would say, to the nature of the advice that we give. But again, you can see there are pockets, and they will tie in very closely with fuel poverty, and they will tie in very closely with just your general indexes of multiple deprivation as well. If I can just hit onto the next slide. Okay, the social rented sector. So government's throwing lots of different competitions out at the moment. It's turning them around very quickly, and I think this is where it's becoming quite confusing. It is throwing literally billions of pounds out there, giving weeks to turn around competitions and having them to be delivered in a very short time scale. Part of that was around regreening the economy. Part of it was to increase the supply chain and help with the COVID recovery. So that's why it does seem very unplanned. So you have schemes 1A, 1B, 2, 3, all within 12 months of each other. The social rented sector, even though they had the decent home standard that they should have done many years ago, they will have had some hard street homes. So again, non-traditional types, solid walls, which would have historically been seen to be too costly to bring up to a decent standard. There is now this social housing decarbonisation fund. It's £160 million in its first wave. The government is saying that there will be, at this moment in time, subject to, again, fiscal review, there will be 4 waves. Again, if we have another recession, that might not happen. So there's an element of uncertainty about it. They're saying you have to find your worst social housing stock and bring that up to an energy efficiency, a relatively good energy efficiency standard. All the government schemes now are starting to align. And when I say started to align over the last few months to say that bringing an energy performance certificate up to a level C seems to be, it's enshrined in law anyway. The government schemes now are all starting to match it, which they didn't do up until only a few months ago. So with the social housing decarbonisation scheme, Housing Plus, being your main registered housing provider, are putting a bid in. It's a consortium bid, or the plan at this moment in time, due for ratification by yourselves. There'll be a consortium bid between Housing Plus Group, Stafford Borough Council and yourselves, as you hold most of their housing stock, and that will be to bring their housing stock up where it's affordable to a C. Again, the restrictions that government has put in, the caps on the amount of money that's available compared to what's needed, they're still very different. But this kind of money, these millions of pounds, has been unheard of before COVID. This kind of money, this scale of work, these types of work, external wall insulation just didn't happen. So this is, you have to say, this is a really positive change. So if I can just move to the next slide. Okay, so again, doesn't hide it very well, but if you remember the previous slide where we'd looked at the where we've been asked for support, this is something separate. So this is the energy performance certificates, and this again just maps out within South Staffs where the most energy efficient homes are. And hey presto, they're in the same areas of deprivation, the same areas where we've been asking for support. You'll probably find the same areas that have high levels of health inequality. So these are the sort of the same people that just haven't had help from years. So you can see, I think, where the priority should be if you're going to go for a worst first approach. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, one of the things that I was asked to touch on, I'm going to say straight at the outset, not my area of expertise, but something I have knowledge of, which I'm happy to share. It's community energy schemes. We've been involved in a fantastic multi-award-winning British Medical Journal Award, Health Service Journal Award, Energy Efficiency Awards for a scheme that we did around a hospital, community energy scheme. We put 1,400 solar panels on the hospital roof, saved the hospital lots of carbon, saved the hospital lots of money on its electric bill, and created a surplus that we then used to help hospital patients. So just some bullet points around community energy schemes, and then some positive views I think I have on community energy schemes. So a community energy scheme is a collective action to reduce carbon emissions and address fuel poverty by generating and managing energy and improving energy efficiency. Community energy projects have an emphasis on local engagement, local leadership and control, and the local community benefiting collectively from their outcomes. The community-led action can often tackle challenging issues around energy, with community groups well placed to understand the local areas and bring local people together with a common purpose. Many community energy projects will generate a surplus, which is put back into local projects that benefit the environment and the community. So most community energy organisations are either community benefit societies or co-ops raising funding from share issues to install renewables and then being owned and run by the members. I'm going to make reference to Southern Staffordshire Community Energy here because it's an organisation that we have worked with at the hospital and are also working with roughly the same team in Cannock Chase. So I'm going to give you some information about them. Southern Staffordshire Community Energy, again, is a community benefit society founded in 2011. It's got 120 members and has raised £1.4 million of capital, including funding for the project at in Cannock and a project at the hospital. It owns 300 kilowatts of solar, including 250 kilowatts on the roof of the hospital, and is in the process of installing a lot more. Again, nice big public buildings, lots of roof space. It's fairly much a no-brainer. South Community Energy was instrumental in founding Chase Community Solar. Again, that generates 900 kilowatts of solar PV on 312 Cannock Chase bungalows, providing free solar energy to those tenants. And it has generated almost £100,000 for community projects since its foundation. So that's the sort of essence of community energy schemes, what they're there for, essentially how they work, and what the benefits are. I have spoken to their chair. He is more than happy to open discussions and see if there's anything positive that can be done in Southern Staffordshire. We can have the next slide. Okay, future decarbonisation and fuel poverty schemes. They are very much in flux. I think at the moment, BEIS, which is the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, has multiple consultations out. They are waiting for government policy on heat and buildings. They know that they have made mistakes in some of the early rounding of funding that they have put out there. Essentially, they have put way too much funding into the supply chain that wasn't ready to take it. They had turnarounds that they were asking for local authority bids, which were in low days, which when you're having due diligence and having to have approvals, just didn't work. So I think as they are learning, instead of having short turnarounds and short windows, these schemes are getting longer and longer and will allow for sort of embedding. So again, when you're asking me, or what I'm asking or trying to say what I think will happen about these schemes, I think they will grow. I think government is clear in its intention. That's the way it wants to go. How they will look, even government is still consulting on the mistakes it's made in some of the earlier schemes from maybe the last 12 months or so. So how they will, I couldn't say. There is other methods of funding. One main one being energy redress funding. This is fines that are put on the energy companies when they misbehave, and that money can then be redirected towards vulnerable households, predominantly for around advice. But again, we are in the process again of working on the community energy scheme, where we're installing £140,000 worth of batteries into properties that have solar, so that the properties generating the solar can then maximise the use, and it's not going back to the grid and they're benefiting from it. So there's work like that can be done. And again, what direction we're going to go? We've got COP26. I do think a lot of the stuff that's happened around decarbonisation in this country we've been put ourselves on a pedestal to sort of say, look at what great things that we are doing before this happens. But I do think that will continue. I think I can see a massive change in direction, certainly funding wise over the last sort of 12, 18 months. So if we can have the next slide. Okay. So what you have done, I'm going to say, is all these government-backed schemes, energy company obligation, sustainable warmth competition, home upgrade grants, local authority delivered green homes grants. There is criteria set down by government, which is consistent, and it is around means-tested benefits. They are reviewing their core eligibility, and it will change in April. At the moment, it allows things like people with disability benefits to be eligible, regardless of their income. So that is changing. What it has permitted is each local authority to say, well, we know our local area, we know it better than you, and we are allowed on this 25% at the moment, up to 50% new sort of eligibility. So the local authority has published on its website its own criteria, which is much wider than the general government one, which allows people to access these funding schemes. So essentially, it's government scheme, you set the criteria, that's how the individuals access this funds. I'm getting the idea to move on quickly. Eco4 is health-based. I'm just going to say, come next year, they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, everything will be different, but we're looking to do some health things. Next slide. Okay, case study.
Yeah, sorry, Martin, I'm just wondering whether just sort of time, these case studies are so excellent. I'm just wondering whether it might be something that we could pick up as part of the presentations right at the end, or as part of the workshop.
Yeah.
Or if you don't mind, that'd be useful just in terms of keeping to time. Because I noticed that we've got two questions, and obviously I know that folks will want to get another couple of presentations in before we move on. Is that okay?
I'm done then.
It's been really helpful. That's been really helpful. Thank you. I've got Councillor Sadler and Eunice Lord from Kinver. Councillor Sadler, I think, was first.
Martin, how much of the accommodation where the majority of the real fuel poverty is occurring is actually privately rented? And is there anything that the council can do to put pressure on private landlords to improve the situation?
Okay, as far as fuel poverty is concerned, private rented is the tenure with the highest levels of fuel poverty. Government is putting regulations forward, which will basically, it's at the moment there's sort of regulations there that basically say a landlord should bring a house up to a minimum standard. If not, they're not allowed to rent it out. Them regulations are getting stricter. I think in the future there will be an opportunity to again just hold landlords to them regulations.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Sadler. Councillor Lord, and then Councillor Ford. Apologies, I think you were waiting at the last one, and I didn't catch your hand. So Eunice first, and then Isabel. Sorry. Yeah. So Eunice first.
Okay, quickly. I was really pleased by the social housing initiative that, the grant you're applying, but it did occur to me that social housing has the advantage that it can recoup the costs of high quality insulation and so on, right? So it's one of the situations where it's actually economic to build it right to zero carbon in the first place, because since it's a rented situation, you can, mortgage it forward, or whatever the right financial words are. I know there's quite a lot of new build social housing in the pipeline, and I wondered what the mechanisms might be for trying to ensure that that gets built to zero carbon rather than lowish carbon, but we'll have to retrofit it a bit later.
I was going to say for planning and stuff like that, not my area of expertise whatsoever. I will tell you, I'll give you a quotation from a conversation I've had with Housing Plus this earlier today, that they purchased some properties that were EPC built in 2009, and I think even they have said they would kick themselves and kick whoever bought them and built them now. I think so, but who builds them, how they build them, to what standard? That's not it. We purely around the retrofitting the funding from government, the new builds.
And I think as Martin's picked that, and as the conversation previously, a lot of that's about building regulations and about the standards required, and certainly for some government funding to build some elements of social housing, there are requirements in terms of the specification required. So there's a couple of people extra coming online now. So Councillor Ford first. Do you want to ask your question, Councillor Ford?
Yes, thank you. I think you're going to say that I've got more money than sense, and I'd be quite inclined to agree with you. I have the solar panels, I have the battery, I did all the insulation things, and then I had a check on my property to find that the insulation had really put my roof at risk because there was condensation collecting above the level. Now, it has cost me several £1,000s to have all that insulation taken out and the whole thing resprayed. Was that right or wrong? How do I advise other people in a similar situation to myself?
So I think historically, I think things have moved forward, building standards have moved forward. There has been a massive change within the building regulations, or the publicly accessible standard. It's called past 2035. It's a standard that anybody delivering energy efficiency measures on behalf of government schemes has to do. There are now independent retrofit coordinators and retrofit assessors. I think that things like that have been flagged up from previous iterations of government schemes and have been, I'm going to say, corrected very recently with some of the sort of new standards that are coming along. But there should be no reason for people not to have loft insulation done as long as it's installed correctly. Same as cavity walls. Some of the early cavity walls were done poorly. Some of the early external wall insulation was done poorly, and that's why BRE building regulations establishments. So where they're publicly available specifications, they have just been changed, and it has had a knock-on effect to the supply chain because it's put a lot of the cost of these things up because they are now being made to do them much more, I'm going to say, properly, in inverted commas.
Thanks for that.
So there's nothing can be done about that then.
If it was put in incorrectly under an energy company obligation scheme, then you should be able to go back to SEGA, which is the installation sort of insurance company, a bit like Fences for Windows. Just depends how long it was installed against and if it was outside of warranty.
Yeah, I think the key issue there, and I've got a couple of people coming in, is that I think in terms of advising people, I think the view is that there's lots of guidance now out there, and we'll make sure that all members and all parishes have the information to be able to get to that they can get to, and therefore give the people the direct access to the experts. So we'll do that for you at the end of the meeting, Councillor Ford. Councillor Mason, I can see you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Annette. I just thought, as the current chairman of the planning committee, I would clarify a few things for all those people who have commented so far on why don't we make people put in more insulation or electric vehicle charging points or solar panels. The simple answer is all planning applications have to be determined in accordance with the National Planning Policy Framework and this council's local plan. At the current stage, neither of those have any such requirements in them, so we are not allowed to insist on them. We can encourage people to do things, but we cannot insist on them as a condition of a planning decision. So the most important thing, as has been said already by Annette earlier, is we must get the new local plan out, and we must make sure that it incorporates all of the things that we would like to see done in future. And then in future applications, once that is out, we can insist on it.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely, and that's the critical point about the local plan. Right, I'm going to move on now to Councillor Eunice Lord from Kimber Parish Council. Given the next two presentations are largely regarding to EV points, I wonder if we can take questions for both. So we'll have Eunice's presentation, and then we'll go on to the county presentation from Louise, and we'll take questions at the end of that, of both of those. Over to you, Eunice. But I think you might be on mute.
Not anymore. Hi, yes, I've been asked to give our experience of installing EV points, which went in spring this year. And here you see a picture of 3 happy councillors and a happy installer after the points had been commissioned. Next slide, please. Why did we go for this? Well, we're in a climate emergency. And on the right, you'll see Kimber's carbon footprint per household, and I'm sure most people in South Staffs have a similar one. What are the biggies here? Gas central heating uses up, gives out a lot of carbon because of the gas, the fossil fuel, and driving cars around that are using petrol and diesel. And food production. Well, we can't do much about food production directly as a council, but the central heating through retrofit we could tackle in principle if we had money. And encouraging people to go to electric cars. We can do something about that. So, secondly, EV points are easy to understand. You don't have to believe in climate change to see that electric cars are the in thing now. So it helps to start the climate action journey. Thirdly, there's a snowball effect, which all the investment advice you read about this picks up on. The more chargers you have, the more EVs you have, and the more EVs you have, the more chargers you have. So you're pushing at something that's happening already and just speeding it up. Putting on-street EV chargers in the village makes electric car ownership a more inclusive option, because people who live in small houses without off-street parking can now aspire to an electric car when they buy their new car. And finally, Staffordshire's quite low on the supply of EV charging points, so we were on a winner with applying for the grant. Next slide, please. So having decided it's a good idea, it comes down to the money. There is a grant available for 75% of the capital cost. So there are some things excluded, like publicity. The maximum grant is 7,500. Actually, they prefer 6,500. You have to persuade them to go that high. So the cost of the council is going to be about 2,000-ish. You can get extra grant for connection costs, but connection costs in general can actually kill the project. I'll come to that in a moment. The grant scheme's run by the Energy Saving Trust, and they want you to get the grant. So if you've decided to go for EV charging points and you've got a decent site, there shouldn't be any problem getting the grant. They will help. And finally, once you've installed your points, they can be a small income stream for the parish, which will eventually maybe recoup your costs and pay for maintenance. So the money almost stacks up. Next slide, please. What are the biggest issues you've got to deal with if you want EV points in your parish or wherever? Site has proved to be the most difficult for people I've talked to. It's got to be a council-owned car park. Doesn't have to be your council, but it's got to be owned by a local authority. And if it's not yours, you have to get permission. Ask for that early, because it can take quite a while. You have to provide free overnight parking for people who are charging their cars. You can put them on street, but if you do that, you'll have to get highways permission, and we didn't go down that route. We couldn't make it stack up. you must have an electric connection, or at least a reasonably low cost way of getting one. DNOs can cost an awful lot. So where we put ours was actually in a car park. You can see the sort of aerial photo thing there. The red dot was the charger on the outside of the toilets that are in the car park, and we own the power supply to that toilet as well. It should be a safe-ish car park where people don't expect their cars to be vandalised overnight, and it must be shown to be close to your target users, the people who don't have the off-street parking. And ours, we were lucky, was in the high street, which means that we get passing trade as well. So the site is the critical thing. You also need a good supplier who has to be approved and has to undertake to comply with all the conditions, which are things like provide a guarantee for 3 years and a maintenance package, and make sure that people who come by chance can charge. They don't have to go away, get a package and come back in 3 days. Talk it through with your supplier because things are changing fast. Okay, so you've got a site, you've got a supplier. Next slide, please. What was the process we went through? Once you've got your site and you think it's a runner, you can start putting your grant application together, and you work with the Energy Saving Trust, EST. You have to show there's a demand. If you've got lots of people writing to you telling you that they want these, fair enough. But what we actually had to do was we just got the stats on projected EV, electric vehicle ownership. We looked at how many cars there were in the village and what percentage of those would be electric in 5 years' time. We looked at how many houses didn't have off-street parking, and so we apportioned, which is 9% in our case, and we apportioned the numbers down. And you end up with a number of EV cars you expect in 5 years, which was 20 or 30 in our case, and that was enough. And EST have examples of the calculation on their website. They have examples of the application form. As you're doing your application form, you can send it to EST and say, does this look right? Am I on the right track? They're very helpful. You obviously need your supplier. You need to be sure they're going to do the job well, and you need estimates from them. And when EST say, yeah, this looks good, you send it in and they forward it to the grant body. And we heard back within less than a month, we'd got the grant. They're pretty slick. So that was all easy. I had a lot of help from the parish clerk because I was very much on a learning curve here. Okay, so then you hopefully have warned your installer that you're going to want to install this, and they can get on with putting the EV points in and putting up the signage that's required. It's installed, you commission it, you have to register it on the national database of car charging points and on things like ZapMap, so people can find you. Complete the paperwork, claim, and you'll get the final 25%. They pay 75% up front, so you can pay your suppliers as you go along, and you claim the final 25% at the end. That's it. Next slide. Yeah. So what was our experience? Our experience was good in the end. The points are very popular despite initial skepticism. Once they were there, everybody seemed happy with the idea. And our neighbourhood plan questionnaire picked up 75% of people picked up EV points, putting more EV points in the village as a high priority. EST were very helpful. They're brilliant. We went with a local firm car charger who are doing the Codsall hub. And they were good, excellent, very busy because they're very good. And little things that we learned as we go along was that we can set the price to users if you get the right installation. And that means we can make sure we're not making a loss at the very least. They gave us kit specifically that would be robust against vandalism because of the location, public car park. And they made sure that the power sharing was such that if the loos needed power, it didn't sort of confuse the whole system or blow the electrics or whatever. The power sharing is done dynamically depending how many people are charging and what the loose power supply needs. The points are 7 kilowatt ones, a pair of 7 kilowatt points, which is the normal, what they expect you to install. Our total cost came in at about 8,000, which was well within the budget. And ever since they've been in there, we've had steady usage at 80 or 90 pounds worth of charge per month, which, considering we were expecting pretty low usage for the first couple of years, we're pretty happy with that. That's giving us enough to reduce our electricity tariff onto a more economic one. So all in all, I'd just say our experience has been good. There's plenty of people out there to help and advise. And if you're interested, go for it.
Eunice, thank you ever so much. That's really helpful. That's really helpful and really useful. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the workshops. I don't know about anybody else, but I think I'm getting some feedback from my machine. So thank you, Eunice. I'll hand you over now to Louise Clayton from the County Council to talk about the county's work and EV charging points as a strategic project that we'd like to look at across the district. So over to you, Louise, and then we'll take questions for both speakers at the end of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you everybody for inviting me here this evening. I don't watch the football, but I will try and be brief to make sure that those of you that want to get away to watch the game can do so. My name is Louise Clayton. I'm the Head of Transport Operations and Future Connectivity at Staffordshire County Council, and I have responsibility for a number of service areas, one of which is electric vehicle charging infrastructure. If I could just start by giving you a very brief update on our climate change agenda, because I've heard some fascinating facts and information so far this evening. Staffordshire County Council, like many other organisations, declared a climate change emergency in 2019. Following that, we've developed a climate change strategic development framework. We've just completed our first year's action plan and then published a report. The report says that in the first year we've achieved a 25% reduction in our carbon as an organisation, and most of that has been achieved by changing our electricity supplier that supplies all of the power to our buildings, our maintained schools, etc. So we've made a lot of headway. We've just published a draft 5-year action plan, which will be approved by Cabinet in October of this year. And one of the changes contained within that action plan refers to electric vehicle charging points and how we need to increase the number available across Staffordshire. And I was really pleased to hear all the work that's taken place in Kimber and really liked Councillor Law's presentation. And actually, you may even be slightly ahead of us in the delivery of the EV agenda on that front. So the Council's role in electric vehicle charging, that's what I'd really like to share with you today and invite you all to join in our future collaboration. As an organisation, we want to understand what a local authority's role is in this agenda, because what we don't want to do is install charging points where commercial operators may see an interest. So what we'd like to do is map locations across the whole of the county through partnership working with the districts and the boroughs and parishes, other public sector organisations and our universities to understand what assets we've got and to understand where the opportunities are. So ideally, the mapping exercise would allow us to identify areas of market failure, so the locations at which commercial operators won't install. And why that's key is because technology is changing so quickly. And at the moment, the lifespan of an electric vehicle charging point is no more than 3 years. So I think we will just need to be very careful whilst moving at pace towards this agenda and supporting the adoption of electric vehicles. We just need to be careful to make sure that we're future-proofed and that we're able to be agile and recognise and respond to new technologies and make sure that we're not investing money in areas that perhaps will be outdated very quickly. I say that with a heavy heart because I am the owner of an electric vehicle and it's been a very interesting journey the last 12 months. So I can talk all night about the challenges of charge anxiety and finding a charger that works. And now that I know that there's one in Kimber, whenever I'm down that way, I might come down and have a look and test it. So what have we done so far? In the last 2 years, we've worked with ACOM consultancy, and we engaged with all the districts and the boroughs in 2019, and we produced a feasibility report which outlined how few chargers there were in Staffordshire, and it looked at the rising adoption rates of electric vehicles. As part of that work, we then agreed 4 areas to move forward in. The first one was to help develop, with districts and boroughs, a Staffordshire-wide strategy to electric vehicle adoption and electric vehicle charging, and that's where we are now. Unfortunately, that piece of work has been on hold since the pandemic hit last March, but that's what we would now like to pick up with you all and invite you to a number of workshops and engage with you to understand what the needs of districts and boroughs and parishes are. Earlier on, it was mentioned that public car parks are of definite interest, and that's probably one of the priority areas that we'd like to look at with you all. And the County Council sees themselves as more of a coordinator, more of a strategic role here rather than the deliverer of the agenda itself. So that's where we are at the moment. Once we've held the workshops, we'll move at pace to develop the strategy for the whole of Staffordshire, and we hope that that will be in place. The draft strategy will be in place by March of next year, because as you know, there's a substantial amount of funding being put to one side by government for this agenda at the moment. So there are workplace charging funds, there are on-street residential charging funds, and there is soon to be a £90 million infrastructure fund just for electric vehicle charging points that will be opened up to all local authorities early in 2022. So it's really important that we start to move forward with that strategy work now. As an organisation, we're also reviewing all of our fleet, because a fleet can account for a substantial proportion of the carbon produced. At Staffordshire County Council, 24% of our carbon is produced by our waste vehicles and 18% by our home to school transport movement. So it's really important that we start to look at those more closely. We'll be developing toolkits that will hopefully help businesses, local businesses, to access some of the funding from central government, and we'll be continuing to work to promote and encourage residents in Staffordshire to adopt electric vehicles and move forward with this agenda. There's just a couple of points I'd like to make, and then I think it'd be really good to open it up to questions and a discussion. 95% of electric vehicle charging currently takes place at home. But obviously we have a substantial number of houses in Staffordshire that have no off-street parking. So the likes of public car parking at parish councils, village halls and public borough car parks is vitally important. We don't at this stage, or we haven't at this stage, installed any charging points on terrace streets, so where people don't have off-street parking, because there are issues with trailing wires. And also, I think if you think back to the days when petrol vehicles and diesel vehicles started to become popular, nobody back then would have ever envisaged putting a petrol pump in front of every single house. So perhaps putting an electric vehicle charging point in front of every single house isn't the right way either. I think we need a combination, and I think a lot of the answers to the problem will be delivered through the commercial sector. And I think that with time, destination charging will be the answer for many people. That will also avoid the need to increase grid capacity on all residential housing estates, something that our distribution network operators are very keen to avoid. So I think over the coming months, it would be very good to pick up some of these conversations with you individually or as a group. And if you don't mind, Councillor Lord, I'll probably reach out to have a conversation with yourself just to understand a bit more about your experiences on a very local level. Thank you very much, Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Louise. That was really fascinating, and I know we've had some. Councillor Bates and I met with you a couple of weeks ago, and we were saying how important this agenda is and how much we want to do it, and really it would be great to engage our parishes. So the more we can work out in terms of how we coordinate that, the better. So look forward to that. Within half an eye to the time, I can see Councillor Sadler has got his hand up. If you could ask your question, Councillor Sadler, let us know if it's for Louise or if it's for Councillor Lord. That would be really helpful. Thank you. Over to you.
It's not really a question. It's more of an observation. This is something else we have to bear in mind for the local plan when we are having planning applications where we have dwellings that do not have on-street, off-street parking actually dedicated to them. They've got some areas of parking separate from the buildings. Thank you.
That's a good point again. Thank you. That's something that we can pick up. Are there any more questions before we move on to the? Oh yeah, we've got Councillor Warren Fisher, Councillor Fisher, and then Councillor Ford.
Cheers, isn't it? Basically, it's a comment really for Louise in the fact that obviously Staffordshire is general, but South Staffs as well is very rural, and we have less sort of public transport options when it comes to transport. And one of the important elements I think is missing from this debate in general is we talk about electric charging points installing in the house, but a house can only cope with a certain amount of load, and most houses have more than one vehicle, and sometimes you can have just my own house, for example, is parents, children, teenage children who have to go off to work. There's no way of getting to work locally, so you've got multiple vehicles to each property, and most of those vehicles are going to need charging around the same time, which is in the evening and overnight. We know the issue with the national grid of maximum demand between 6 and 8 p.m. So we've got the introduction of sort of smart chargers that avoid that time. But as a community, rural communities, we're more dependent on cars than say more urban centres that have better public transport. And you can't just have an unlimited amount of chargers on a property because you just overload it. So just basically making sure the county are making that argument forward for the destination charging, the fast charging, that we will probably need more of destination charging in our region, being more rural, is I guess the point I'm trying to make. So I'm just hoping that the county are sort of making that argument.
Yes, we are, and thank you. That's a very valid point.
Thank you, Councillor Fisher. That's really helpful and good point. I hope you'll be able to contribute to some of those conversations later on in the workshop as well. So thank you for that. Councillor Ford.
This is for me. Hello, this is Councillor Kelly from Penkridge with Councillor Ford.
Oh, hello, Councillor Kelly.
Hello. On the point of electric chargers, as they are only valid for 3 years, what will be the subsequent cost for replacement of those sort of chargers? Because as time goes on, they will be, as I say, European standards will change, and will there be further incurred costs?
Will there be a requirement?
And will there be a requirement to replace those?
Would you like me to answer, Annette? Or
yeah. Please, Louise, I think it's a strategic question.
Thank you. So I answered on the basis of the average lifespan of a charging point is 3 years. That's generally accepted within the commercial arena at the moment. And also technology changes at such pace, so you would expect that. So we're already seeing induction charging being tested and trialled in Germany across the piece. So at some point in the future, we may not even need charging points on walls. There'll be induction strips in driveways maybe, or you will charge as you drive along a road. So the adoption of technology is happening at such pace, it's impossible to predict where we'll be more than a couple of years from now. So it's really important that we future-proof whatever we do put in. So I don't think the lifespan of chargers will increase massively, but one of the things that we will be considering strategically as an organisation is the business model that we use with any installation of charging points. So there are a number of options with business models. We could decide to invite a partner to collaborate with us. They would install, they would maintain, and they would take all of the income generated. Or we could, for example, install the charging points and generate an income for the county council, but then those maintenance costs and replacement costs may sit with us. And I've tried to simplify it there for time, really, but there are probably half a dozen different business models that I think we need to consider for Staffordshire as a whole. It may not be that one business model suits everybody, though, so I do recognise that, but I think it is something that's important that we consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. I've got one more question. I've got Councillor Nigel Kane, and then we'll move on to the workshops. Councillor Kane.
Hi guys. Louise, is the socket a universal socket for every type of car charging input? Well, that's going to cause problems.
Excellent.
So
Excellent
obviously
question.
somebody hasn't been thinking. The other thing is, we haven't got the technology yet for induction charging strips. This is a subject that I do a lot of work on. And we're looking at 15 years into the future. And the other thing is, 3 years for a charging point. It's absolutely low and it's ridiculous. There should be at least a 7 or an 8 year warranty. And a lot of people aren't going to be able to afford £7,500 to £8,000 for a charging point. And then we're told with electrical vehicles, you need a new battery after 5 years. That's £6,000.
Yeah,
I'm
so
sorry,
a couple of
no.
points. No, really good points. So as far as the induction technology, I only know what I've been told, so you probably do understand it more than I do. With regards to the lifespan of a charger, it probably will last for 10 years. However, people will stop using it potentially after a number of years, because what happened in the early days is they installed 7 kilowatt chargers or even slower chargers, so it takes forever to charge a vehicle. Whereas now you can get 150 watt or even 300 kilowatt chargers, which means that literally you can drive into a place and you can achieve a full charge within 20 minutes. And if we're really going to address this or embrace this agenda, we're going to have to treat electric vehicles in the same way that we treat petrol and diesel cars, because we can't all sit around all day waiting for our cars to charge on a trickle charge.
I agree.
That's why I talked about destination charging. So who knows?
Right.
I think that the
follow
funding
that
is out there at the moment, but
if you charge a battery too quickly, it will actually buckle the internal plates. So that means then the battery is whacked. Right? So that's £6,000. Why can't somebody develop a charging system that as you drive along, you have an internal generator that is charging the main battery inside the car?
Those really good points, Councillor Kane. I think those are all things that, in terms of looking at strategic options, the way forward across the county, obviously, but making sure that what we do is look at the options that are right for South Staffordshire. Clearly, there's a lot of work to be going on, and there's quite some early sort of development projects as well in terms of EV. Realistically, it's probably still quite new, but something that we obviously need to start to look at. But your points are really valid, and I'm sure we'd like to hear more of that about those in the workshops. Good. Very good. Very good. Very good. I've got an eye on the time. I was going to say a huge thank you to Louise and to Councillor Lord in terms of those questions, and I'm sure we can talk about more about that a bit later. So, Davina, Sabrina, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. And also the next slide, please, as well, that sets out the workshops. Super. Thank you. Right, so we have a system with the teams that you all have been automatically allocated into a group for a workshop. When we say go, that's when you will go into that workshop. So the questions that we've got this evening are really based around the conversations that we've had. And obviously the council is really keen to promote awareness in the district. That's been very evident this evening. One of the things that as a district council we've been absolutely keen to do would be something such as a climate festival. So we would have a designated, and it may be a year, it may be a month, but I mean, and actually have a number of events, awareness raising, all sorts of things across the district, but as part of this climate festival for South Staffordshire. So we're looking to do that. And would really value your thoughts. On that. But it would be really good to see what parishes are already doing and what you would like to do in terms of that awareness raising. So that would be excellent if you would be able to have some of those thoughts in the workshop. So that's one of the questions. Secondly, what support do parishes require individually and collectively to be able to support and to be able to do more potentially collectively in terms of climate change? And ultimately, another question for the workshops is, what do parishes think is the best way of keeping in touch on matters relating to climate change, be it workshops, websites, and what was that? So we'd like to have some feedback on that. So, as I say, you're all in individual workshops based on your localities. I think I'm right in saying, Liz, when we say go, you get moved into those groups, and then we'll have, Liz, I'm just checking now in terms of time, if we can put, say, 20 minutes for those workshops. Is that right, Liz? Have we got 20 minutes for the workshops?
Yep, Annette, that's
Yep.
fine.
Okay.
I just want to say, if anybody finds themselves in the wrong group, if you just pop a little message in the chat box to let me know, I'll be able to move you. Just let me know which locality you should be in, and I'll make sure you get in the right group. So apologies if there's any mistakes. I've tried to do my best. So good luck.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Liz. That's great. Each group has got a facilitator, and that is likely to be a council officer. I'll be one of them. Grant's one of them, and Mark Jenkinson is one of them. So there'll be names that you're likely to recognise in the group. And we'll have some feedback, and we'll go through some of the consensus points at the end. So, Liz, if you're happy to put everybody into the groups, that'll be great now. Thank you.
Maybe she's putting us in the group.
Yeah.
Hi, Sabrina. I think it's just me and you now. We are still recording. Hi, Annette. You okay?
Yes, thank you.
Not sure why you've come back into here. Which group should you be in?
I'm with.
Let me see if I can. So Holly Fuller. Okay, let's have a look. So Holly, you should be in locality 5.
Yeah. Yeah. Am I in the wrong group?
You've come back for some reason. I'm not sure why. Let me just see if I can.
Oh. There's got a thing that says join room. Shall I just click that and see what happens?
Yeah, you shouldn't be allowed to do that though. I tried to set it to stop you from doing that.
Shall I try it?
Yes, just try and get back into your breakout room. Right, I've got 3 more now. Let me see if I can try and get you guys back as well.
Yeah, so I should be in Billbrook.
So Billbrook, that should be right. So your locality 4.
Hi Liz, it lost my connection.
Okay.
On locality 5.
Annette, can you see any option like the other lady had to
Join
take
room,
yourself back?
Yeah. Join room.
I'm not sure why it's sort of overrided it, but if you can go to join room, you should be able to join the others.
Okay.
And if Corinne, if you can try that as well. Can you hear me, Corinne? I can't hear you, Corinne. Are you on mute? Corinne Taylor?
That's me. Hello.
Hello. Is there an option? Can you see an option to join the room?
No.
Not sure why it's sort of overrided.
I've got just 3 names here: SD, CT, and EE. Well, CT's
yeah,
being
that's just the main room that we're in.
Oh, right.
So let me have a look.
I saw you at one point talking to Holly, and then
you should be in in locality 5, shouldn't you?
That's it. Yes.
Let me try this and hopefully that'll just take you there.
Thank you. Oh.
Just thinking about it.
Okay, thank
Got a Corinne Taylor guest. Are you with us, or is there anybody there?
I think that was a double of the quarantine.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, Sabrina. Okay, I think we're all good now. I'll mute myself now. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
fine.
Hello, Corinne. You okay?
Yeah, I don't know what's happened. I keep dropping off.
I think this because we've got you down twice. We've got you joining twice on 2 different accounts.
Oh, right. Okay.
We've got 2 Corinne Taylor, so that may be something to do with it. Are you on a phone device as well as a computer, or
No, just on my laptop.
you've just joined off one link?
Mm.
Okay, it's that's strange. I don't know why it's brought you back again.
I've got a join room on the bottom here.
Yeah, did you actually get in the meeting before?
I did once, and I keep seeing everybody,
and
I
then
can
you're
hear them.
disappearing again. Oh
Yeah.
dear. Try that again.
Okay.
Try that again.
All right. Cheers.
Are we finished now?
I think we're rejoining the main meeting.
That's right, everybody. We've rejoined the main meeting. The wonders of technology. The wonders of technology.
Well done to the IT team, because this is where normally people collapse.
There's no IT team available.
Collapsed earlier on.
I think we have to credit Liz the Whiz on this one, because she's the one that's got us all in and out here.
Yeah, we do. Liz Eggington, who deserves a big round of applause for getting us all in and mostly all back. So I don't think we've lost that many people. So let me just do a quick.
Well done, Liz.
Thank you.
Yeah, well done, Liz. Well done, Liz. Let's take a quick roll call then. Just as somebody from locality, is somebody here from locality 1?
Yes.
Locality 2 here. Locality 2 here.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. Locality 3 back.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Locality 4, because I was in that, so I know that. And locality 5, are you back? Great, super. Well, it's worked. Big round of applause to Liz for that. Right. So what we're just going to do is just look at the key things coming back from those workshops, and we're going to go locality by locality and just answer the question. So remembering what the key question was in terms of the what was the in terms of awareness raising and us wanting to look at a climate festival. Did we think this is a good idea? What would you like to do, and how can we do it? So locality 1, if you'd like to go and just give us your feedback from locality 1. Who's going to feedback?
I'll do the feedback. Thanks, Annette.
Thank you, Ed.
So in terms of whether or not it was felt to be a good idea, a climate festival, the answer was yes. There was discussion, however, that it could potentially go even wider than South Staffordshire, across Staffordshire. Promoted by the parish councils, potentially through things such as summer fetes, where you could have different stalls. So be about kind of raising awareness and potentially a bit of education, but also kind of signposting to key services that are available, such as the grants available that Martin deals with through Beat the Cold. Information such on recycling lithium batteries, that sort of thing could be covered as well. I think it was felt that you need to potentially target it to the key demographic, and there's opportunities to promote it through parish councils' websites as well as their newsletters. It was discussed whether or not it would be appropriate to do almost like bespoke events on a locality basis, and I think it was felt there's probably pros and cons to that approach. Secondly, in terms of kind of what the parishes are already doing, promoting things through social media, their website, in terms of kind of climate change, pros and cons, getting the messaging out there. There's some local tree planting initiatives taking place, with the civic society planting over 100 trees locally. It was felt there could be an opportunity to use firms to sponsor the festival, so local firms as well. That may be a good way of getting information out. And also, in terms of what parish is doing already, there's already been upgrades in Penkridge to the Hailing Dean Centre in terms of new lighting and measures such as that. And it's through the festival there may be opportunities to speak to residents and kind of share their own experience about how the benefits of upgrades that have been done by the parish. Residents may also be able to benefit from such things as well. So in terms of the next question was in terms of what support do parishes require individually and collectively. Obviously, potentially support with some grant money. It was felt that there could be an advisory board run by across the 3 tiers of council, so parish, district and county, to give people the help that they need. Also, it was mentioned about potentially getting people into like local tea rooms, like a weekly tea room. So getting different people to come in and speak about different subjects. So what grants are available and kind of different educational things relating to climate change as well. In terms of comms, I think it was felt that these workshops are worthwhile. Probably felt kind of every quarter was probably about right, but they could also be supplemented through regular bulletins sent to parishes with some key information as part of those. Also opportunities then to promote things through local schools and also social media as well. I felt that sometimes social media is more effective than websites these days, and that there may be opportunities for a kind of climate change specific social media page. I think hopefully I've covered most, if not all, the things that.
Ed, you've done a great job. What you missed was we think we should have something at the Staffordshire show.
Yes, that was it. Yeah, something promoted at the Staffordshire show as well. Hopefully I've covered most things. If there's anything else, and if anyone, feel free to chip in. I'll just add if I can, Ed. So, sorry, Annette. I'll just add. Yeah, well done, Ed. You covered majority. It was just the parish council champion was mentioned, possibly as somebody who could lead on this from parish level. And also, I think it sort of echoed all the way through the evening. And it's something that Councillor Wyatt mentioned, sort of like the sums in total. So this environmental challenge that we've got, obviously with the card charging and that, it's sort of knowing the ongoing cost as well. So I think a lot around awareness in that. I think it's pretty a fair point as well. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Locality One. That's really good. So I think we're getting a very clear steer that they all think the Climate Festival is a good idea. There are opportunities. A big, strong message coming through about joining up, having conversations with schools. Love the idea in terms of the parish champions. That's really good as well. We really like that. I'll stop talking and I'll hand over to Locality 2 and 3, who can add in their thoughts as well in terms of their session. So who's going to feedback from Locality 2 and 3, which was one workshop, I think?
I'm happy to do that, Annette. It's Ryan
Brilliant.
here.
That's Ryan.
Apologies, I joined the meeting a bit late. I'm also going to be relying on Andy, Aston and Imri to prompt me on anything I might have missed out. Right, so answer to the first question. I think it's blindingly obvious all parishes are more than happy to continue this conversation. You know, there's obviously a willingness to be involved on the ground, really. I think there's lots of discussions, particularly around the importance of this work and how we promote it across the tiers of the government. Good examples really around the warmer homes and things like that. I think. Oh, actually, do we have a list of the questions so I can relate it back to my notes?
The first question was about the Climate Festival. The second question was about what activities, and the third question was how would parishes like to continue to be engaged.
Okay, so yes, right. I think so. Yes, I'm into out of sequence. That's a good start. So yeah, I think basically all parishes are happy to continue the conversation and take part in some form of a climate change festival, which might be quite timely with COP 26 just around the corner, I think. And then there was lots of sort of conversation around the issues really about the importance of things like connection between the localities, which is perhaps something that might be overlooked really, and sustainable transport links to reduce the reliance on cars really. That's it's one thing to throw a lot of resource at, sort of EV charging points and stuff. But we shouldn't be taking our eye off the fact that we could also be encouraging folk not to use cars in the first place. I'm happy to obviously try and make more sense of these notes and send them out to Liz at a later date. There's a discussion around flood risk is still an issue, obviously, in locality 3, which we'll be picking up later on at the hopefully at the next locality forum anyway. There's some discussion around getting the message across, and Andy mentioned around sort of good news stories and stuff. I did mention I know that Sabrina's putting together a climate change resource pack on our the council website, and it's the importance of promoting that really and getting the message across through social media as well. Amy Watson from Wheaton asked around if what literature the council could be producing as part of that. Some of the residents in that locality were after a bit more reassurance, say around like the warmer homes stuff. Just from the point of view, you know, it's sometimes these things are just leaflets to the doors, aren't they? And you're not sure whether it's a scam. You know, some of our residents might be not sure if it's a scam or not. There's discussion around the green spaces in the areas and what we can do to encourage the use and promote these, both from a climate change and from a health and wellbeing point of view. Catherine from the Forest of Mercia talked about tree planting yet again, but also mentioned that Forest of Mercia have been doing some courses on making benches with community groups and using those in green spaces, which might be another opportunity to get folk involved in this angle. The final question, we ran out of time a bit, but this is around how parishes want to continue this conversation. I think there are some good ideas here really around the fact that regular workshops are a key way to keep the momentum moving on this one. Councillor Perry mentioned that, you know, it might be an idea to have this as a standing item on parish meetings, you know, to try and pick up those local actions, but also feedback, an opportunity for the district council to feedback on a regular basis about what we're doing. Councillor Fisher mentioned again about the importance of putting the message across on social media. And there was a final question from Amy at Wheaton Aston, which just got in before we got called back into the main meeting around sort of if there's any opportunities for sort of a training for sort of members and stuff around planning linked to sort of the carbon literacy thing, and how planning decisions can be linked to sort of climate change. I think that's come to the end of my very messy notes. Andy?
No, that's great. Thank you, Ryan. That's good. That's really good. So again, very much picking up the like the idea of a climate festival and keen to be engaged and want to continue those, continue doing that, and obviously to work to how to make that happen. We'll come to that, I think, at the end in terms of how we make some of that happen. Again, with an eye to the time, I'm going to ask now locality 4 to come and to feedback. I think that's Mark, wasn't it? That was a group that we were both in. So Mark.
Yeah, that's me. Thank you, Annette. Some similar themes from the other workshops that came through in locality 4. I think overriding support for climate change festivals within locality 4. I think it was also flagged as well that next year Commonwealth Games, Queen's Jubilee are also opportunities to link in and highlight climate change as part of those events. I think moving on to number 2 in terms of additional support, I think one of the points that was raised regarding Purton was I think a willingness to move to EV charging points in those areas, but potentially a lack of owned land, either district, county or parish council owned. Predominant spaces are all commercial owned by Sainsbury's, and other than a pilot in London to move to the installation of EV points, there's no plans outside London at this point in time. So with limited areas to install parking, it becomes a difficult challenge to move forward. Other areas in terms of additional support is awareness raising regarding wildflower meadows. I think some general lack of understanding across communities in terms of that wildflower meadows, some people just see it as uncut grass, and there needs to be more awareness raising around that. Could be through interpretation boards placed in wildflower meadows, which will hopefully raise awareness and general comms on that. Also, it was picked up regarding the cutting and the maintenance of the wildflower areas, ensuring that's done in a timely manner, but also consistently. In terms of an operative point of view, you might have one operative go out who will cut it one way and another a different way, and ensuring wherever possible that's done in a consistent manner. But one of the colleagues on the call also highlighted that due to some of the climate change implications, the cutting of grass and the seasons are changing, so it becomes more difficult to plan those operations due to the seasonal changes and impact we've had from climate change. And I think most people will be aware on the call some of the logistical challenges at the moment in terms of equipment and demand for that, which if everybody's looking to carry out that work at the same point in time, that becomes more of a challenging issue to get hold of that equipment for those tasks to be carried out. I think on points in terms of what's the best way to continue involving members in terms of climate change, we just about cut off at that point in time. But I think Keith Elder from Purton was indicating that on the last call, a number of parishes went away and discussed these issues, and it would be a good opportunity to feed back in terms of what parishes have been doing. Obviously, that keeps everybody else on the call involved in terms of what's happening and what progress has been made across parishes, but also presents an opportunity for good practice to be shared across other areas, and for that to be picked up and potentially used in other parts of the district. And those were the key points I had down. But if I've missed anything, please jump in at the end, or anybody else on the workshop.
I think you picked it all up, Mark. Again, support for a climate festival and willingness to be engaged. I think that really good points in terms of the potentially 2022 being the year of climate change festival for South Staffs, because of all the other good stuff going on as well in the district. Be a nice way to celebrate it. Lots of good things with schools. I know Annette Lloyd mentioned in terms of relationship to eco schools, which I think is an absolutely cracking way to engage and do the awareness raising. I have got an eye on the time, so I'm going to ask locality. Thank you very much, Mark. That's great. Thank you. Locality 5, last but by no means least. I think that possibly is that you, Grant.
It is. Feedback? Yeah, I'll pick up most of the stuff, and then Harvey hopefully can sweep up behind me if I've missed anything. Well, the downside of always going last is that everybody generally said most of the things anyway. But I suppose just to pick out some key points, and in no particular order in relation to the questions. Eunice talked about and Kimber how they'd done some survey and questionnaire work around their neighbourhood plan, which they'd also had given them some information relating to climate change. I think one of the key areas we discussed, and it's sort of been picked up by some of the other ones, is some of that leadership and information that we can help coordinate as the district council. And some quite practical things, and Eunice raised the point that she's been looking at doing some insulation work in her home, but they weren't really sure who to ask, what to do, what's the best way to do it, and whether we could look at almost coordinating things, I suppose, through a central repository like on our website. Then we have coordinated information, but almost a how-to and who to approach and what the best thing to do for certain types of properties, and we hold that information centrally and then promote it through various different means. Whether different communication forms for different folks. People have already mentioned social media, all those different ways of getting that information out there that are quite practical tips for people to be able to come to and to get ideas about how they can do certain things, or how they need to approach it, or who to ask in certain instances to get some of those quite practical improvements to people's homes. I think somebody had also referenced as well about more coordination, not just across South Staffordshire, but potentially across Staffordshire and some of our neighbours. And it's that sort of strength in numbers, economies of scale type approach, and sharing good practice. We talked about some potential for community-based projects, and whether that's, for example, if we know certain types of housing in a certain street, we know we've got issues, whether we look at them en masse rather than necessarily tackling them individually. We did talk about potentially sort of community heating type projects, but the difficulty of doing initiatives like that in South Staffordshire, which is quite rural and dispersed. I think in terms of the sort of support from the district to help the parishes, again, it came quite strong through is that sort of leadership role that us as the district council could take and to work in partnership with the parishes, and certainly help on that research and publicising that research to help parishes also get their heads around this agenda. There was also a request, Imre, if you're still on the call, around sharing the learning on the community hub project and the energy efficiency type improvements that we've been able to make and learn from. And some of that discussion is probably something that we could share more in the medium to long term as we've got in the building and we've got used to learning about how everything works and what sort of savings we've made by doing X, Y, and Z. And we also had a conversation around the local plan, and really it was more around sort of timescales for when people are going to be able to see the next stage of the local plan and see what's being proposed in it. And certainly my comment to everybody, well, to the group, but to everybody here is have a look at it. And if you please respond back to the consultation if you think that there are things that we could be picking up as part of climate change agenda in the local plan. It's a consultation and we want to hear from you on that one. So it was probably, we didn't stick to the script and we certainly ran out of time, but I think those were some of the key things that we talked about. Harvey, have I missed anything from your notes? And I know you came in late, so whether there's anything else there that I've not picked up.
No, I think you've covered that really well, Grant. You've covered all the points there. I think the only other matter that we really discussed was renewable energy and how that will feature in the local plan also, and some of the challenges such as the 40,000 homes that will need retrofitting going forward, and also just the request for us council to be really taking the lead on climate change going forward with a consistent and proactive approach on the subject. Yeah, so that's all.
Thanks, Harvey. And that concludes the scores from the Locality 5 area.
Thank you very much, Locality 5. So we've heard back from all localities. So the feedback was largely welcoming and positive in relation, exclusively positive in terms of the Climate Festival. That's great. And what we'll do now is we will look to organise something and almost put a bit of a committee together, I think, in terms of what's that going to look like, how are we going to look that in different strands. Because I think if we have something like a year-long festival with some very key engagements, obviously conversations with schools as well. So look to put something together. So we'll be sending something out to everybody who's been part of the conversations today, just in terms of any volunteers for that, for some of those that committee. I think if you like, that can help us in terms of identifying what, how, and when that can happen. But I think that's something that we'll be looking at. As a council, we'll be shortly producing our action plan, and also we'll be shortly discussing at a council level our actions and what we've already achieved in terms of the climate change and what we want to be doing next. I think that probably sort of concludes our sort of conversations. I think that what I will pass you over to now to Councillor Bates to close the event for us. But a huge thank you from myself in terms of all the rich conversation and diversity of conversation, and we will be in touch to continue because I think the climate change does give us the climate change festival does give us that sort of longevity of conversation and something to plan for, which I think would be good over the over 2022. Councillor Bates, would you like to close?
In closing, I'd like to thank you all for your valued input. We find these opportunities to discuss with you as a parish representatives and members of friends groups give us an opportunity to look at these issues together, which is invaluable. We will be in touch with you shortly regarding the details of the Climate Change Festival, and I'd like to say a very big thank you to all the speakers and the rich discussion in the workshop sessions. We look forward to tackling these important issues together. And thank you very much for attending, and good night. Thank you.
Good
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Right,
Good night.
thank you.
Good night. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Annette, I'd like to say thank you for rescuing me from the other meeting.